Anyway, he said in the first several days, he read a lot of different scripts that were supposed to go into pre-production. None of it was good. So he closed down the studio, and he closed down the studio. He fired a lot of employees, and then he took everything down to like 0%. And they kind of built from that. He like he put What a Way to Go with Shirley MacLaine into pre-production. I don't know if you've seen that. Something's Got to Give in pre-production with which is another story. Marilyn Monroe, Dean Martin, Silvers, and Sid Charisse, and that was directed by George Cukor. You can see part of that on YouTube, actually, and it was going to be a very slick movie. What happened was Marilyn Monroe came into Something's Gotta Give, and she was so addicted to sleeping pills that she was unreliable to show up on set any given day, and then they really couldn't get her to work, so they shot about 30 minutes of the movie, and then they fired her from the movie. They said, this isn't going to work. And then Sid Charisse said in an interview that she started to get letters from Marilyn Monroe saying, I would like to complete this film. Please lobby with me to get this film completed. So then right before they started production back up on the film, Marilyn Monroe died. So then that was turned into, oh my goodness. Can you hear that?
Someone's having a party.
It's the Von Trapp family singers, ladies and gentlemen, singing Happy Birthday out of my window.
We hired them for this moment.
Yes. But we did. They cost a lot of money, but boy, we did it just for this podcast. But anyway, Something's Gotta Give turned into Move Over Darling with Doris Day and James Garner. That was another project they put into production. Dick Zanuck also put The Agony and the Ecstasy with Rex Harrison and Charlton Heston. And then Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines, which I think all of those except Agony and the Ecstasy made a good deal of money. So he was able to get the studio back on track. And he found sitting on the shelves the rights to The Sound of Music. And he was like, this is just sitting, rotting away. We paid $1.25 million for it, which they still hadn't finished paying for because they had to pay for it in little installments because they did not have that money when they first bought the rights to the film. So then when he wanted to put that into production, enough people around Hollywood knew that Ernest Lehman wanted to work on this project that then Dick Zanuck went and he hired Ernest Lehman to write the film because Ernest Lehman was so passionate about it, even though everybody else in Hollywood were like, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely stupid. Well, they thought that it was just too light and too frivolous to make any kind of a good movie. And there were also rumors floating around Hollywood. They knew that Dick Zanuck had shut down the studio for several days. They were like, they are bankrupt. They are not going to be able to hire you. Do not take this job, is what Ernest Lehman kept hearing. But he eventually signed on when he went to lunch with Dick Zanuck, and Irving Lazar, who represented Rodgers, Hammerstein, Lindsay, and Krause, approached them at the table, and he said, I have another client who would like to buy The Sound of Music off of your hands for $2 million. Would you be interested? And Dick Zanuck told him to go to hell. We're going to produce this movie. But then it was later found out that Jack Warner wanted to buy that off of their hands because of the success. Well, not because of the success of My Fair Lady, but he also wanted to turn it into a musical, maybe with Audrey Hepburn, like My Fair Lady. Ernest Lehman decided that he was going to work on Sound of Music, turned it into this big project. And one of the first things they started talking about was directors. And Ernest Lehman had written for Robert Wise in 61, 62 on West Side Story. And he thought this will be the perfect director for him because he was a dark and gritty director. It'll be the perfect counterbalance to all of this fluff, saccharine sweetness. They approached Robert Wise, who was working on The Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen. He was directing that picture. So he ultimately said, this is not my thing, and he turned it down. And then they went to Stanley Donen, who had no interest. And also all of these directors had heard like the rumors of 20th Century Fox having no money. They did not want to get into a dying project. Ernest Lehman went to Stanley Donen, who turned it down. Stanley Donen had been a director of many MGM musicals, co-directed many MGM musicals with Gene Kelly. And then when Stanley Donen turned it down, Ernest Lehman went to Gene Kelly, and he went to Gene Kelly's house, and he said, Gene, the reason I'm here is because we want you to direct Sound of Music. And Gene just immediately showed him out of his house, and he said, you find somebody else to direct this kind of shit. So that was the end of that with Gene Kelly.
Oh boy, Gene.
Oh boy, Gene.
And Tell us again with Hello Dolly, bud.
I know. Well, and can you imagine the kind of what would have happened had he directed Sound of Music? That would have been a lot because he worked so long with Vincent Minnelli and just the lavishness of the MGM musical. And you can definitely see that in Hello Dolly. Gene Kelly, costume designed by Irene Sharaff, and then Michael Kidd choreographing. It has the feel of an MGM musical. Would have been,
Michael Kidd.
I know, all of his dances, but but it would have been too much for the Sound of Music. Audiences would have been overwhelmed with sweetness. It would have been like walking into the witch's house in Hansel and Gretel. Had something like Gene Kelly been brought on, because Lord knows he probably would have tried to bring in Irene Sharaff as he did, and Michael Kidd, and maybe.
Well, yeah, like talk about saccharine. It would have been. I mean, listen, we love Gene Kelly singing in the rain. What a gift! What like probably one of the best movie musicals of all time. So like, Gene Kelly's an artist, but like, not for Sound of Music, not for us. We're thankful for Robert Wise, because again, like you see West, and I know you'll talk about it with Robert Wise, but like you see stuff like West Side Story, and you're like, yes, this is what was needed for Sound of Music.
Exactly. And it was like, you can see it in an executive suite, West Side Story, The Haunting, which is very strange that he directed that between musicals, West Side Story, and Sound of Music. But yeah, Robert Wise kind of brought it down to another level. But we haven't gotten to Robert Wise yet. We still have to get to the next director that they thought was going to direct it. After Gene Kelly turned him down, Ernest Lehman and Dick Zanuck went to visit Daryl Zanuck in New York, and they had a conference in his hotel room. And Ernest Lehman said, one of the best directors in the world, in my opinion, is William Wyler. Now, William Wyler had directed 3 of Bette Davis's biggest hits, The Little Foxes, The Letter, and Jezebel. During the height of her career, he directed Mrs. Miniver, which was, I think, 1942's or 43's biggest hit with Greer Garson. He had directed Best Years of Our Lives. He had directed Ben-Hur. So he was hot stuff in Hollywood at the time. So Ernest Lehman then took William Wyler to go see Sound of Music, like 2 or 3 years after the opening, like after Ernest Lehman had seen it. And since then, Mary Martin had left and another company of actors had come in, and they sat down and they watched it. And Ernest Lehman had the initial response of like, oh Lord, what have I done? This is terrible. When he saw it without the original cast. But he still had things in his minds of why he loved it. But anyway, he took William Wyler, one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, to see it. And he knew he was going to hate it. So they got out, and Ernest Lehman said, what do you think of it? And he said, I hated it. I hated every single second of it. And so he kept him up all night. Like they walked around the streets of Manhattan all night. Ernest Lehman continually trying to talk William Wyler into directing it. And then they flew back to LA the next day. And he spent several weeks. Finally, they got William Wyler to say that he would direct it. So then William Wyler called Roger Edens to be like their producer, supervisor of music, which Roger Edens had done that for a long time at MGM. He was one of Judy Garland's vocal coaches while she was at MGM. So he knew what she was doing. So then Ernest Lehman, William Wyler, Roger Edens flew to, and there is a point to this. I know this sounds like a lot, but there is a point to this story.
Ben. I trust you.
Okay, thank you. They flew to Austria to scout locations. And the entire time that they were in Austria, when they were not scouting locations, William Wyler was on the phone with different studios looking for a different project to pull him out of Sound of Music. William Wyler's hearing was so bad that he could not hear that phone connection, that international phone connection. So he'd constantly have Ernest Lehman coming into his hotel room, translating the call. So Ernest Lehman knew this was kind of a lost effort. We're not going to get him to direct it, even though he signed the contract. One of the studios that William Wyler was talking to on the phone while they were in Austria was MGM, who was in pre-production for a movie called The Americanization of Emily.
That's right. Oh, that's right.
Yes. And The Americanization of Emily starred Julie Andrews. That was her second film. And Julie Andrews had been brought to Hollywood by Walt Disney after he saw her in Camelot in 62 or 63. And she said, well, I can't star in a movie now. I'm about to have a baby. So she had a baby. And then she went to Hollywood and she made Mary Poppins. And then MGM hired her to be in The Americanization of Emily with James Garner. And so Ernest Lehman had listened to the entire phone conversation between William Wyler and MGM about him directing The Americanization of Emily, which ultimately didn't work out. But William Wyler, like talking to Ernest Lehman after the phone call, he said, that's starring Julie Andrews. He said, honestly, in my opinion, Julie Andrews would make a perfect Maria. So that's why Julie Julie was even considered for the project was because of William Wyler. So there was something good that came out of it. Anyway, William Wyler eventually did find another movie called The Collector at Columbia to direct. So then William Wyler had his agent call Dick Zanuck and say, he's going to be directing the Collector at Columbia. Would you hold off on production for Sound of Music? And Dick Zanuck said, we will not hold off. You tell him that we will find another director. So in the time that this great big saga looking for a director happened, Sam Pebbles with Steve McQueen, production was held off because they were trying to shoot in Taiwan. They were having a big problem trying to shoot the movie because the Taiwanese government did not want them there. So that movie was put off for a year. So then Ernest Lehman just happened to drop off a copy of the script, his script that he had rewritten for The Sound of Music, not Lindsay and Krause's script from the stage play, but his own script. He dropped it off to Robert Wise. Robert Wise read it and was like, I actually really like some of the things that you've done with this. And Wise had not seen it on Broadway. So then he called Saul Chaplin. Saul Chaplin had been a producer and musical supervisor at MGM for a very long time. He had won the Oscar for An American in Paris and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. He had worked on High Society. He had worked on a lot of big MGM musicals, so he knew what he was talking about. When he told Robert Wise, he said, it's not the best story, but it has the best score, in my opinion, that Rodgers and Hammerstein ever wrote, and it was the most financially successful of all of their Broadway shows. So he said, I would seriously consider this. So after Robert Wise read Ernest Lehman's script, he signed on to direct the picture. And because Sound of Music is so sugary sweet, I have great respect for this concept, which would not have been a concept that other directors would have followed. He wanted it visually to be very minimalistic, very clean lines, very neutral colors to take away from all of the goodness in the script, the saccharine goodness in the script. And that is something that I've noticed watching Sound of Music a lot, is like you can go watch Hello Dolly or An American in Paris or Dr. Dolittle from a year later, and all of them are just they're bursting with color and overwhelming detail, and Robert Wise took all of that and just put it down into a box and made it bare bones, which I greatly respect. William Wyler, however, did not want to do that. He had storyboarded this massive sequence where he was going to actually film the Nazis marching into Austria, and even though historically it was very peaceful, William Wyler wanted to show like the absolute horrors the Nazis marching into Austria and them like shooting people in the streets and burning buildings down and all sorts of stuff like that. And plus, William Wyler was a very lavish director, so it would have ended up being something absolutely ridiculous, I think. And then going back to Julie Andrews, Robert Wise and Ernest Lehman knew that William Wyler had told them that she would be the best person to play Maria. They also, I think, Dick Zanuck was rooting for Doris Day. Yeah, it was Doris Day, Shirley Jones. They considered Grace Kelly, Leslie Caron, Angie Dickinson, a lot of different names. But Robert Wise, Ernest Lehman, Julie Andrews hadn't even had a film that had been released yet. So they went to Disney and they watched some footage of Mary Poppins. They were like, we need to grab this girl out before somebody else does. They signed on Julie Andrews. And originally, Fox wanted to put her on a four picture contract. And she and her agent did not like that. So they put her on a 2-picture contract. And the first film in that contract was Sound of Music. Can you guess what the second film was?
Please tell me it's Star. Please tell me the second one
is
is
Star.
Yes!
It was Star, yes.
What a gift!
It was Star, which I know, which absolutely flopped. Anybody who's not seen Star, it's Gertrude Lawrence's life story in a giant overbloated musical that was also directed by Robert Wise and produced by Saul Chaplin. It's like the same team that made Sound of Music made Star, but it cost an incredible amount of money to retell Gertrude Lawrence's life. And also, Julie Andrews wasn't her sugary good self. She was playing this loud, body, bodacious, music hall star, which was not Maria in any way. So anyway, that flopped.
They literally said like, oh, the Sound of Music saved 20th Century, and then Star took that swiftly away. They were, because on a side tangent, like Star, they literally said like, oh, Sound of Music made us so much money, like it's the same team, do whatever you want, Star. Like the amount of like just indulgences Star takes, like it's for a creative person, you wish you had all of that, but like Star just. It's 3 hours. It could have easily been 90 minutes. like